about a bunch of Nissan's? Hey, it's Jag. Welcome to part 7 of the Trinity amps Triwatt build. Today I prepped the transformer wires and twist some extra wire for the heaters. It says here that the Egyptians discovered marshmallows in 2000 BC. I guess BC means before candy. Why isn't? Anyway, the Egyptians made it from mixing the sap of the mallow plant and honey. That seems pretty innocuous. I wonder how it became the evil confection we know today. Mallow plant grows in marshes. That's quite the coincidence. It was considered the food of the pharaohs and the gods. Well, there's your alien connection. Are you afraid to ask for help? Help with what? For today, what I'm doing is not what I had intended to do. In the last video, I said I wanted to just push through and get the whole amp assembled and ready for testing. I can't do that today. I had a situation come up, and I wasn't able to do as much work on that as I thought I would be able to. My cute little dog, who I love very much, had some surgery this week, and there was a little bit of difficulty with that. She's fine, but it took me away from working on the amp for a good 4 or 5 days. Today I will be prepping the wires, doing the initial wire dress on the transformers, and winding some extra black and red wire for the heater supply. For sure, the next video, the amp will be assembled and ready for testing. There will be a little bit of soldering left to do, as I said, for testing at the various stages before we power up. You want to check the transformer voltages and whatnot before you wire them to the board. Once you've got the transformers wired to the board, you want to test the bias supply and test that all the voltages are going to the right places before you put the tubes in. Then you want to put tubes in and connect a speaker and check that all the voltages are correct. If that all looks good, I may even do a quick little run through playing the amp, but the video after that one will actually be the demo of the completed amp. So let's get into the transformer wires. One of the things I'm learning doing this video series, and this is my first one, is to think ahead of time and plan some things out a little bit more. Basically what I'm saying is I should not have mounted the transformers before braiding, twisting the wires. I should have prepped the wires on the transformers ahead of time before I installed it. So that said, I've taken the transformers off the chassis now, and now I'm going to prep the wires as I should have done at the beginning of this. So I'll start with the power transformer. On my right we have the supply side, where the power comes in from the wall and the switch, etc. Over on the left side, we have the red wires, which are the high voltage secondaries, and the green wires, which are the low voltage secondaries, or the heater windings, the filament windings. The power transformer can be wired for 110 volts input, 120 volt input, or 240 volt input. So there are different ways that you will connect these wires together for those different various input voltages. 110 is not really a common voltage anymore, and we don't use those wires. That is the black white and white black wires. Since we won't be using these, we will twist these wires together and heat shrink the ends, and then once we get this back through the grommet, we'll just loop these wires back around, tie them off, and tuck them into a corner of the chassis in case we ever need them. We don't want to cut them off, but we also don't want them flying around anywhere. So I'll start with those, and all you do is you just tightly twist the wires together. How I do it is, as you see here, every turn I just give it a little bit of a tug. You don't want to pull too hard. You don't want to pull your wires out of the transformer or damage them, but you do want the wires to be fairly tightly twisted. So that's the 110 volt wires twisted, and we're ready to put the heat shrink on the end of those. One thing I do, I'll take a paper clip and I'll just clip the ends down to something when I need to use both my hands. That way this won't come out unwound. They tend to kind of want to unwind again. Okay, so there's the heat shrink, and I just take about a ½ inch or so of the heat shrink, and I need 2 pieces of that, one for each wire. You can use a soldering iron to do this, or I just use a lighter. Just find it works pretty well, and you don't need to melt the wire. You just want the heat shrink to shrink around the wire and not pull off easily. If you pulled hard enough, you could take that heat shrink off. You also want to make sure that you've left enough overhanging the wire that the wire can't poke out through the end of the heat shrink and short on something. So to make sure that happens, what I do is I slide it on so I see the wire poke out, and then I just take it back to a 1/16 of an inch or so back so that I know the wire is on the inside of the heat shrink. And then we shrink that up again. Okay, so that's the 110 volt wires that we aren't going to use. They are wound, and I've got them clipped down here. So the instructions have several different diagrams for wiring this power transformer. We've got the 220 volt wiring here. We've also got the diagram for the 120 volt wiring here, which is what we're wiring. We have a white, we have a white red, and we have a black, and a black with a red stripe. I don't know if you can see that red stripe there. The white red and black red wires twist together, and they go to one tab of the power switch. The white and black wires twist together, and they will go to the neutral side of the IEC connector. So same thing, we're just going to wind these together tightly. You don't want to risk breaking those wires. They're pretty robust on a transformer, but you just don't want to risk that. Once again, keeping in mind that we want to pay some tribute to the golden age of the high watt, trying to twist these so that the twist looks nice and neat and even. It's not really that important. I mean, if your twisted wires are crooked or lumpy, it's not going to affect the way the amp works. As a matter of fact, if you didn't twist these wires at all, the amp would still work fine. So that's the red black and red white wires, and they are now wound together. For the supply side, the last two to wind together are the black and the white. It can be hard to see, at least for some of us, it can be hard to see the red stripe on the black wire. And I have made the mistake in the past of getting those two switched. So I want to make sure I have the solid white and solid black together and the black red and black white together. So measure twice, cut once. You can never, ever check things too many times. You can actually twist 2 or 3 times and then sort of tighten it up by pulling 2. You don't have to do it on every turn. I just find that if you want them to look neatly twisted together, you don't want to go too many twists before you tighten them. They just kind of get a little bit, I don't know what the word would be, out of alignment. So there's the black and white pair wound. So we've prepped the entire supply side of this transformer now. So I'm going to turn this transformer so I can get to the red and green wires. As I said, the red wires are the high voltage secondary. They will go to the filter capacitors and ultimately provide the power for the operation of the amp itself. The green wires are for the heaters of the tubes. They're a lower voltage output. These red ones are very high voltage. So what we do with these is we need to braid them. When you're trying to do this tightly, you can find you end up pulling on the transformer, and the transformer ends up moving around a lot on you. It's one thing that can be helpful is to put it on its side and use the weight of the transformer against itself. So similar to twisting the wires, every few braids, I guess you would call it, I'll just give a little tug to tighten it, make sure everything's tightened up. I remember when I first got out of high school and I was taking my first year of electronics engineering, and actually they called it electronics engineering technology, where you weren't really learning engineering, you were kind of learning the practical side of electronics. Basically it was the tech, being a technician, learning how to be a technician. We used to have to learn how to weave string around bundles of wire to keep the wires from separating and catching on things. And you had a whole class learning how to do that. You would do that in that class for, I don't know, we spent a couple weeks, I think, doing it. And you got tested on it. You got graded on how well you did it. I think that's another one of those sort of lost arts. People don't really have to do that now. They use zip ties or even heat shrink tubing. So that's something you don't have to do as often now. It was a neat skill. It's time consuming, but it kind of looked cool. That's part of the charm. Okay, so there's the red wires braided together. And so now we have the green wires to braid, and we're done with the power transformer, ready to install it back in the amp. I used the supplied twisted heater wire that came with the kit when I was doing off-board wires, and I used it all up. So I need to twist some red and black solid core wire for the wiring to the heaters. The wire that's supplied with the kit is 600 volt, and it's 20 gauge. You can use 22 or 20 gauge for the preamp tubes. It's only going to carry about 6.5 volts, so you don't really need 600 volt wire for your heaters on the preamp tubes, at least. So I've got some 300 volt rated solid core 22 gauge here. So that's the power transformer. Everything braided on this side, twisted on this side, and it's ready to go back in the amp. Okay, so here we've got the output transformer. We've got the side that comes in from the amp circuitry, and what we have there is we have a blue wire, blue-white wire, a red wire, a brown-white wire, and a brown wire. The blue, white, and brown, white. Those are secondaries for EL34 operation of this amp. One thing that they have changed about the Triwatt kit, it used to be only for 6V6 or KT66s, but they're having these transformers wound now with a 3.5K primary, so you can use EL34s as well. Same as the power transformer, we've got a pair of wires here that we aren't going to use. We aren't going to cut them short because we might use them down the road. So I will just twist these together, and we will do the same thing, heat shrink the wire ends, and when we install this in the amp, we'll just tuck these wires away out of the way so they're available if we need them. So now what we're left with for the output transformer is a blue wire, a red wire, and a brown wire. This is the high voltage side of the transformer. It's the side that's toward the amp circuit itself. The red wire is the center tap, and the brown and blue wires go to the plates of each output tube. When we do solder this into the amp, the red wire will go off to the turret board. The blue and brown wires, as I said, go to the plates of the output tubes. you can have a situation where you wire this in and you can get some oscillation, some feedback or squealing. The reason for that oscillation we'll probably go into in another video down the road. You want to leave enough extra wire of the brown and blue so that if you need to, you can swap them to the different tubes. If you were going to rewire the amp for EL34, I suppose the ideal situation would be to then untwist those brown, white, and blue, white wires, and then unbraid these wires and braid those with the red center tap wire here. I'm not likely to switch to EL34s for this. If I do, that would be a somewhat permanent change because there's no way to easily switch back and forth. I suppose you could add another switch and do that, but you'd have to be really paying a lot of attention to what's happening with your bias supply, where your switch positions are. You'd have a switch for KT66 operation, then you'd have a switch to switch EL34s. Why do you need to do all of that switching? It's not like in the middle of a gig you're going to do that. When you're recording, it's probably just as easy to use a different amp. I don't think it's really worth wiring for that many tube options. That being said, I have a design I did myself about 13 or 14 years ago called the Jagster. Warren Haynes from Government Mule and the Allman Brothers actually has one of them. It's a single-ended amp. It can take any tube you want to put into it. Basically, I've run it with EL34s, 6V6s, 6L6s. I have even one that's running a KT88, and I find I don't really change that up too much in real world usage. I have right now two of the Jagsters myself, and one has a KT88 in it and the other one has a 6V6. KT88 is just kind of it's a big bottle tube, has a lot of bottom end, stays very clean, and of course the 6V6 breaks up very nicely. I will do a video detailing those amps sometime later this year. The output or speaker side of the output transformer has 3 taps. We've got the common wire. That one is always connected, but then these other 3 wires, they go to the selector switch. The orange tap, which uses the entire winding of the transformer, is for a 16 ohm speaker cabinet. Then the green tap is for 8 ohm speaker cabinet, so it doesn't use the whole winding of the transformer. It's tapped off in the middle. That's why they call it a tap. And then the yellow wire is tapped off even sooner in the windings for 4 ohm cabinet.
Over the middle. Now again, take your right one, bring it into the center.
The center.
And again, take these two together and put your left over both of them. So basically you're working on a single strand when you're coming from.
Okay, so that was kind of hard to figure out, but basically what you do is you take your wires, you take the right one, you go over this one, then you take the middle 2 together, take the left, and go over. Then you take the right and go over, bring now what's the middle 2, and bring the outside one over again. So what we're doing is I'm taking the black over the yellow in this case, then I'm going to take the black and green and take the orange over those. Then I take the yellow and I go over the orange, bring what's now the middle 2, the yellow and the black together, and bring the left over those 2. So then we take the orange over the green, so the middle over the first, over this one, and then we take the 2 middle wires, which is orange and yellow together, and then you take this black one on the left over. So this is somewhat complicated, and I'm not going to explain it any better than this. You can look it up online. That's what I did. I went to I'll link to the YouTube video of how to braid, or I think they say plait, 4 wires. So that link will be in the description down below. Essentially what you're doing is you're taking the outside over the first one beside it, then you're taking the 2 inside wires and taking the other side over them. If nothing else, it looks pretty cool. And I forgot to heat shrink those unused primary wires, so that blue with the white stripe and brown with the white stripe. So once I'm done this, I'll heat shrink those, and then we are done prepping the wires for the transformers. I'm not going to show mounting the transformers again. I've already done that. Nothing changes. Looks pretty good to me. First time plating 4 cords together, or wires. I think it looks pretty good. And then I'm going to heat shrink those 2 wires I forgot. And then we'll move on to twisting, making a pair of twisted wires for the heaters. Once your wires have sat there twisted together on their own for a while, they will get used to being in that position, or being twisted like that, and they will relax into that shape. So if you watch here, if I let go of these, they'll probably untwist somewhat, but not a whole lot. What's that, about a half a turn? It's still kind of untwisting a little bit, but it's pretty happy to be twisted tight together. So I get my heat shrink, and again about 1/2 inch, maybe just a little more. Okay. There we go. All right, so that's the transformers ready to go back into the chassis. As I said, I'm not going to show that. I already showed mounting the transformers into the chassis, and it will be no different this time, just that the wires are braided and twisted. The other thing I need to do is make a new pair of twisted red and black wires to go to the heaters of the preamp tubes. So I've got some red and black 300 volt 22 gauge wire. I will be using that for the preamp, for wiring the heaters of the preamp tubes. And generally what I'll do is I'll take about 2.5 feet of the wire and make one long segment of twisted wire. If I don't use it all up in this project, I'll use it in the next one. Get it roughly the same length. So twisting this together is no different than twisting together the wires on the transformers, the wire pairs on the power transformer. Except you need to clamp one end down to make it easy to twist. You know, you don't have the weight of a transformer keeping the wires together. So what I do is I just use a spring clamp, which holds a little bit tighter, and I will use it to clamp the ends of that wire around. You can clamp it around anything. I have a big power strip at the end of my workbench here, so I've just used that as a block to clamp with the spring clamp, and then you just start winding your pairs. One thing you want to do to keep the wires twisting, rather than having one curling around one that's straight, is when you're tightening them, you want to pull the wires left and right like this. If you leave one wire here and you pull here, you'll end up basically with one wire going straight down the middle and the other one spiraling around it. I don't think that will really affect things much. It just doesn't look good. We're paying tribute to the golden age of the high watt here, so it has to look good. Another thing that you'll find while you're doing this is as you're twisting the end you want to twist, the end you're not twisting is, of course, twisting together itself too. So you want to untangle that every once in a while, or you'll end up with a big knot at the end. One thing you can do to help those twisted wires stay together, twisted tightly together, you may have seen me doing this noticed me doing this on the transformers too, but you can kind of go back to the beginning and go every few inches and give it a little twist, and then back at the far end it should loosen up a little bit and you can twist it a little bit more there. So, and this is easiest to do. You can use stranded wire for your heaters. The transformers have stranded wire. It's not whether it's solid or stranded that matters. But one thing you will find with the heater wire, if you use the solid core wire, it's easier to keep it twisted together. It's also easier to route it around the amp. You'll see when I do the summary on the assembly of this amp that the heater wires are run at neat angles as well. You want to get the heater wires away from other parts of the circuit, because this is really a major source of hum if you don't run your heater wires correctly. And the polarity is important too. When you coil your wire, if you twist it as you're coiling it, you twist it the direction that the wire is twisted, it will just help it coil up. It's sort of like putting away a blade for a bandsaw. You twist it as you put it together, and then it will stay twisted, and it's easy enough to keep that way. So that's the wires on the transformers prepped, and they're ready to go back into the chassis, and the prepping of the wire for the heaters. If you found this video helpful or entertaining or just enjoyable to watch, please smash that like button down there. That helps me a lot, and it doesn't cost anything. Check the links below. I will link to that YouTube video about plating 4 wires together, or cords. Check out my band One Soul Thrust. The link to our website is down there, and as well to our Patreon and our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. Stand by. Next video, we will be ready for testing and fully assembled.